So today we're going to talk about a thinker named Gregory Bateson. He argued that our whole modern world is kind of built on a giant mistake, and his entire career was really an attempt to solve this one single problem, a huge mismatch between the way we think and the way the world actually works.
And this quote, this is the whole ball game right here. Bateson was convinced that we've created a world just full of crises, ecological, social, even personal ones. And not because we're bad people, but because the very software we're running in our heads is out of sync with the hardware of reality itself.
He called this gap a dangerous mismatch. And to really get what he was talking about, we've got to break down what that mismatch actually is.
Okay, this slide just lays it out so clearly. On the one hand, you've got how we tend to think, especially in the West. It's linear, right? A causes B. It's dualistic. We love to split things in two, mind versus body, us versus the environment. And it's super fragmented. We chop up knowledge into these neat little boxes like biology, economics, psychology. But here's the thing. Nature doesn't give a hoot about our boxes. It's circular, full of feedback loops. It's relational. Nothing, and I mean nothing, exists on its own. And it's recursive, which means you see the same beautiful patterns repeating at different scales. Like the branches of a tree look a lot like the veins in a leaf.
So who was this guy who saw all this so clearly when almost nobody else did? Well, let's meet the man who basically lived between these two worlds.
The thing about Gregory Bateson is you just can't pin him down. He was a brilliant anthropologist, sure, studying cultures, but he was also a pioneer in cybernetics. That's the science of communication in systems, like in animals or machines. And he wrapped it all up as a systems thinker, always on the hunt for the patterns that connect everything. It was this crazy mix that gave him a viewpoint that you just couldn't get from inside one single field.
And the irony is just delicious, isn't it? The very academic system he critiqued for its rigid little boxes had no idea which box to put him in. People were constantly misunderstanding him because his work just refused to be categorized. He wasn't just dabbling, he was showing them that the real magic happens in the connections between the boxes.
And this really shows you what his superpower was. He wasn't a man without a category, he was a bridge builder. He basically said, look, if you want to understand anything real, you have to look at it from all these angles at the same time. For him, this wasn't a weakness. It was the only honest way to try and understand the world.
So, if our fragmented thinking is the problem, what's the solution? Well, for Bateson, it all started with completely rethinking one of our most basic ideas, the concept of mind. Okay, this is so important to get. For Bateson, your mind isn't just the stuff between your ears. Mind isn't a thing, it's a pattern. It's a property that emerges from the relationships and the information flowing within a system. Your brain is a crucial part of that pattern for sure, but it's not the whole story, not even close.
And once you accept that, well, the world just lights up in a new way. You start to see that an ecosystem thinks by regulating itself, with all the feedback between predators and prey. A culture thinks through its language, its stories, its laws. Even a simple communication network is a thinking system. It's a huge, radical expansion of what we even mean by cognition.
And this brings us to his most famous, most beautiful idea, the pattern which connects. He said that the same fundamental organizing principles, the same patterns of information, show up everywhere. You can see it in the perfect symmetry of a crab, in the way a healthy forest maintains itself, and in the unspoken rules of communication in a family. That underlying blueprint, that connecting pattern, that, he said, is mine.
Now, if that wasn't mind-bending enough, here's where things get really fascinating. Bateson, this totally cutting-edge scientist, started to realize that his new ideas about systems weren't really new at all. In fact, they were ancient.
I mean, think about how radical this was for a scientist in his time. He was taking traditions like Buddhism, Taoism, and indigenous worldviews seriously. He didn't dismiss them as superstition. He saw them for what they were. Incredibly sophisticated alternative ways of knowing, epistemologies, that had kept this relational systemic wisdom alive for centuries. And just look at this comparison. It's uncanny. The core insights of these ancient traditions line up almost perfectly with the basic principles of modern system science. Yeah, the language is different. One might use poetry, the other uses math. But that core understanding of reality as a web of relationships, it's identical. Bateson was one of the very first to build that bridge across time.
All right, so this is all fascinating history, but why should we care about some 20th century thinker today? Well, because his warnings have, in so many ways, become our reality.
Bateson's #1 prophecy was this: our biggest challenges aren't going to be technological, they're going to be epistemological, a crisis in how we know. He was convinced that a way of thinking that chops up the world and ignores how everything is connected would, inevitably, lead to ecological disaster and social chaos. Sound familiar? Yeah, it should.
And here's the final proof. His legacy is undeniable. The very ideas that made him an academic outsider in his own lifetime, things like feedback loops, self-organization, relational networks, are now the bedrock of totally cutting-edge fields like complexity science and ecological systems theory. The guy wasn't just ahead of his time, he was drawing the map for the future of science.
So we're left with this one question, the question that drove Bateson's entire life. It's the same question ancient traditions explored with meditation and that modern science now explores with supercomputers. It's a question for a forest, for a country, and for every single one of us. How does a system understand the system it is a part of? Really thinking about that might just be the most important pattern of all.